What if a teacher's hidden beliefs could actually shape a student's entire future? It's a huge question, right? And trying to prove it seems almost impossible. But today, we're going to dig into this really fascinating study that found a super clever way to make that invisible bias visible. Let's get into it.
I mean, this is the core question, isn't it? We all hope the answer is a simple, straightforward yes. But what if something that we can't even see, a teacher's hidden expectations, is silently tipping the scales? To figure that out, we need to go to a place where this question is incredibly urgent. So our story starts in the state of Bihar in India. For years, people noticed this stubborn gap in how well students from different social backgrounds were doing in school. The easy answers were, things like poverty or a lack of resources. But some researchers started to suspect that something else was going on inside the classroom itself. Now, to really get what's happening here, we have to talk for a second about India's caste system. It's a really complex and deeply rooted social structure that, for centuries, has organized people into different groups, often shaping their entire lives from the day they're born. For this study, the researchers focused on two major groups. On one hand, you've got what are known as forward castes. These are groups that have historically had more social advantages. And on the other, you have backward castes, communities that have faced generations of social exclusion. It's really important we use these specific terms because that's exactly what the study looked at. And this brings us right to the big idea, the central hypothesis. What if this performance gap was actually being fueled by teacher bias? The problem is, how do you prove that? You can't just walk up to someone and ask them if they're biased. I mean, our deepest prejudices are often hidden, even from ourselves. So the researchers knew they needed a totally new approach. So how in the world do you measure something that's hidden, maybe even from the person who has the bias? Well, the researchers came up with this really ingenious three-step process. It was designed to do just one thing: make the invisible visible. Okay, so here's how it worked. First, step one, they had to establish reality. So they gave all the students standardized tests to get an objective, totally data-driven ranking of who stood where in the class. Then, step two, capture perception. They just asked the teacher to subjectively rate those exact same students as top, middle, or bottom performers. And finally, the brilliant part, step three, find the gap. All they had to do was compare the teacher's perception to the student's actual rank. And that difference, that gap, is the key piece of evidence. They gave it a name: evaluation bias. It's just a simple number that shows the difference between how a student actually did and how their teacher thought they did. This number is everything in this investigation. And this is what makes the study so powerful. By looking at how the exact same teacher rated different students within their own classroom, they could rule out all sorts of other explanations. See, it wasn't about comparing a good teacher to a bad one. It was all about seeing if one single teacher's perceptions changed depending on a student's caste. All right, so the method was in place. The tests were done, the ratings were in. All that was left was to crunch the numbers. So what did this evaluation bias actually show? So the first finding was kind of weird. On this chart, a positive number means the teacher actually ranked a student lower than their test scores deserved. And what you're seeing is that on average, teachers underestimated all of their students across the board. In math, for instance, the average kid was ranked over half a position lower by their teacher than where they actually should have been. It pointed to this kind of general pessimism in the classrooms. But then they found this. This is the bombshell. When they looked specifically at how forward caste teachers were rating their students, they found that backward caste students were between 17 and 27 percentage points more likely to be underestimated than their forward caste classmates. I mean, this isn't a small statistical error. This is a massive, undeniable gap. So that leads us to the critical question, the real heart of the matter. Was this huge gap happening because backward caste students were actually performing worse, or was it all in the teacher's head? The next two slides put these two ideas head to head. First up, let's look at reality. Based on the cold hard data from those standardized tests, there was no significant performance gap between forward and backward caste students when they were in the same classroom. Objectively speaking, they were performing at a similar level. But then, you look at the perception. When the researchers looked at nothing but the teacher's subjective ratings, a giant gap suddenly appears out of nowhere.
Even though the test scores showed they were on the same level, forward caste teachers consistently ranked their backward caste students way lower. The gap wasn't in reality, it was entirely in the teacher's mind.
So, the evidence is pretty undeniable. The gap wasn't in the students' report cards, it was in the teachers' heads. Which brings us to maybe the most important question of all. So what? Why does a teacher's private opinion matter so much anyway?
Well, it matters a lot. It matters because of something in psychology called the Pygmalion effect. It basically says that a teacher's expectations can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If a student is treated over and over again like they aren't very smart, they might just start to believe it. That can crush their motivation, make them try less, and have a devastating long-term impact on their confidence and their entire future.
So the crucial point here, the one thing to take away from this whole study, is this. The gap in how these students were evaluated was driven entirely by the teacher's biased misperceptions. It had nothing to do with any actual difference in the student's academic performance. And that leaves us with a really challenging final thought. This study shows pretty powerfully that what someone believes about you can actually shape your reality. So the real question isn't just about finding bias, it's about changing it. How do we help teachers see the incredible potential that's already sitting right there in front of them, in every single student? It's a huge question, and one we'll leave you to think about.